There may be no one who wants questions about possible Trump campaign ties to Russia to go away more than the president himself. But after his firing of FBI Director James Comey on Tuesday, the president might have his work cut out for him. It didn't take long for people to point out that what they saw as similarities between Comey's ousting and the so-called Saturday Night Massacre during the Watergate scandal of Richard Nixon's presidency. Historian and author of Landslide, LBJ, and Ronald Reagan at the Dawn of a New America, Jonathan Darman is at our New York Broadcast Center. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, Chip. Thanks for having me.
Can you first explain for people who aren't old enough to remember or just forgot what the Saturday Night Massacre was and why people are drawing parallels now?
Sure, of course. Yeah, the people are drawing the parallels. In fact, so much that we're seeing Tuesday Night Massacre headlines in the last 24 hours. The Saturday Night Massacre happened on October 20th of 1973, and it really stemmed from the special prosecutor that had been looking into the Watergate scandal in the Nixon Justice Department. The special prosecutor was in the Justice Department, seeking a court order to get Nixon's White House tapes. And the Nixon White House, and most especially President Nixon himself, very much did not want the special prosecutor to get a hold of those tapes. And we know now that that was because there was evidence of wrongdoing by President Nixon on those tapes, and he was really trying to obstruct justice to keep those tapes out of the public eye. So when Cox, the special prosecutor, continued to seek the White House tapes, the Nixon White House, President Nixon, ordered his attorney general to fire the special prosecutor. The Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, refused, as did his deputy, Bill Ruckelshaus. Finally, the number 3 person in the Justice Department did fire the special prosecutor, but at that point, it became a huge national story that really threw into question people's faith in the rule of law in this country.
And Democrats now are, in some cases, desperately trying to make the connection between what's happening here and the Saturday Night Massacre. Do you think they're being overly optimistic in thinking that there's that much going on here?
Well, we don't know. And I think that's actually a similarity to America in October of 1973. We don't know the full story about Donald Trump and Russia, and we don't know what the reality about Donald Trump's advisors and any collusion they may or may not have had with the Russian government in the 2016 campaign is. But people in October of 1973 didn't know the full Watergate story. And President Nixon wanted to keep the country from finding out the whole Watergate story. That's why he fought so hard to keep those tapes from getting out. And I think what draws concern here from not just Democrats, but from people who study history is the precedent. You know, when Archibald Cox was finally fired by Nixon, he said, whether we are to continue to have a government of laws or of men is now up to the Congress and ultimately to the American people. And for some people, that's really the ultimate issue here, is this action by the president a threat to the rule of law in this country?
President Nixon was considered to be a pretty skilled and methodical politician, no matter what other problems he may have had. Is the Trump White House working in that same kind of way?
No, that's something else I've been thinking about as I've thought about the similarities in the last 24 hours. If you look at the history of the Saturday Night Massacre, it was a huge problem ultimately for the Nixon White House, but there was a lot of thought and some complex negotiation that went into the ultimate firing of Archibald Cox. That seems to be quite different from a lot of what we've seen from the Trump White House as we're learning more about the history of the last week. There was not a lot of thought, apparently, about the process that would go into the firing of James Comey and really coming up with the predicate to explain it.
Is there anything about how President Trump works that you see as Nixonian?
Well, I think, Nixonian is a pretty broad term, but what we typically think of it as sort of driven by paranoia, and sort of an obsession with enemies, and a desire to conceal things from the public. That this is a young presidency. There have certainly been a number of elements of President Trump's conduct so far that would raise the concern. And most presidents really get terrified of that label Nixonian. President Trump, for whatever reason, has not seemed to be particularly thrown by the comparison, so much that the day after he had the Comey firing, who did he have in the Oval Office with him but Nixon's Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Henry Kissinger. Right.
What do you make of that?
I mean, you know, it's one of these plot twists, along with the Russians in the Oval Office. Like, you couldn't really make it up if you were writing fiction. So for those of us who study history, it's pretty amazing.
What was your reaction when you heard that he was there today, that Kissinger was there today, on a day when we're talking about the Saturday Night Massacre?
My mind went to all these pictures that you have of Nixon and Kissinger in that office, and of some of the things that Nixon might have said to Kissinger in that office that we know about from those White House tapes that Nixon was trying to keep from the public eye in the Saturday Night Massacre.
All right, Jonathan Darman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks a lot, Chip.